So you got your dog over the first jumper obstacle, and now comes the hard part. Actually, most people don't have a real hard time getting to the first jumper obstacle in the send. What we've done so far is point out some of the obvious things for the novices, and then go on to the very difficult situations where maybe seeing the correct line in or making sure your momentum is good is not so obvious. But 50 or 60% of the time, I think most handlers don't have a problem getting to the first jump. Getting to the second one is where the problems start to begin. Now that's not true if you have a situation like this. We talked about this, where ideally you set your dog on a line into the send that's going to automatically take him to the second jump. Then you only have to worry about the third. Now we're going to talk about how to handle your dog while it's in the send and you're outside the send and you're actually trying to control them from a distance, 5 to 15, maybe 20 feet sometimes. And there are two basic methods that I use. The first I call a running shoulder turn, or actually I call it mad marks, running shoulder turn. And the second is a concept called convergence, which is by moving towards something, you're cueing it. And if you don't know what that is or haven't dealt with that before, get ready for something very exciting because you're going to use that a lot in all of your agility handling. Okay, let's go to the first one, the running shoulder turn. Okay, we're going to talk about that, but first let's get the mechanics down, what you need to do to perform a running shoulder turn, and just stand up wherever you are and stand up straight with your knees forward and your hips forward and your shoulders forward and your head forward. And now take your shoulders and turn them 45 degrees or more if you can to the side and walk forward. And then run forward. Now, what I would do and what I suggest you do is put your arm out as well. Now, you might call that an arm cue. I call it more of an accentuation of the shoulder cue because you're pointing your shoulders this way. And that's kind of telling your dog, stay out there. Shoulders are a directional cue, a very overlooked shoulder cue if you ask me. Turn your shoulders, put your arm out, and run along a straight line. Okay? That's the shoulder turn. Along with that, now this is what you're doing is when you're running along the line, you want to keep your dog out there. Okay? Along with that, you have your motion. You have to keep moving because two things can happen when you stop moving. One is the dog will stop moving when you stop moving. And the other is that for a lot of dogs, if you stop, the dog is going to come back toward you, which is the exact opposite of what you want to happen in fast. So you need to keep moving in the same basic direction you want the dog to go. And then let's get up to our list of cues. We got our motion, we got our shoulders, and then arms and voice. Now that's just your basic jump cues, Jump, your arm out, jump, or go, whatever you're going to say. That's your 4 cues right there. You're cueing 4 different ways to keep your dog out there. So let's go to an example right here. So here's an example we're using right here. So you got your dog over the number 4 jump, and now on their own, they might go to the number 5 jump because, as we've talked about all along, you always have to look at what your dog is doing. Does your dog have good momentum and speed at that point? Does it have the obstacle focus to actually take it to the next jump? They might do it on their own. And all you got to do in that case is not mess it up. And what that means is don't do anything inconsistent or contrary to what you want them to do. You don't say, hey, come here. That's obvious. Or you don't turn and run away. That's obvious because they might follow you. Just do something consistent, like maybe not say very much, not do a big arm motion, just kind of keep moving in that direction because that's consistent with what you want the dog to do. Okay, so you're watching your dog, it's obstacle focus and it's motion, and if it's going to take it, great. What if the dog is starting to come back toward you? That's what is generally going to happen in fast. The dog's going to come back toward you and miss a jump. Well, that's when you listen to your jump cues. Go. Combination of your arms, your voice, and everything like that. And I would say in that case, cue bigger. Now, some people don't like to talk real loud. Some people don't use a lot of arm motions. They just expect the dog to go that way. And I think that's kind of silly, especially when you're that far away because, your cues are much stronger when the dog is closer to you and they're weaker when they're further away. So you got to add some punch to it. So, make that arm motion big and say go really loud to get you to that second jump. And then you do it the second time after they take the second one. Are they kind of going where they want to go? If it's a tunnel, they might just naturally love the tunnel. Same thing. Shoulders turned the way you want them to go, and your basic jump cues. And that is the running shoulder turn. I'm actually going to have a whole lesson on the running shoulder turn because that's just one of many, many applications for it. It's a great thing to use. It's sort of like what we talked about in our last lesson. The lesson being about the lateral send, because what we were doing there, like here, is our body is moving in one direction, but our other cues, our shoulders and stuff, are telling the dog to go in another direction. It's not as extreme maybe, but you're still moving this way and you're cueing this way. So it's kind of a way that you're giving maybe calculated inconsistent cues to suit the situation. Okay, that's your running shoulder turn. Now let's go to the more exciting one, the converging. Converging means to move towards something. And by moving toward a jump, in agility, you're actually cueing the dog to take that jump. I'm not talking about your dog being next to you. I'm talking about your dog being 10, 15 feet away from you, which is what FAST is about. So here's a little chart right here. Here's a jump, and here's the dog, and here's you. And if you move toward that jump, and the dog is already kind of basically moving in that kind of direction, by you moving toward the jump, you're converging toward it, and that cues the dog to take the jump, even if you don't get close. So you can move up, be moving 5, 6 feet in that direction. It starts the dog going in that direction until it's committed. Once it commits, you don't even have to go close to the jump. So you can be 10 feet away from the jump, moving toward it, getting your dog to take that jump. You don't got to go near it, and you're cueing the jump. It's perfect for FAST. Okay, so why does converging work? Okay, it's because dogs understand angles. If you're right here and your dog is 20 feet over there and you throw the ball out that way, like this, I'll show you. Here's Poochie. Okay, and here's Anna. It's hard to get good video when you're outside and don't have a good setup, but I promised them apart, so I had to do that. Okay, if you throw the ball out that way for the dog and the dog goes over here, the dog knows what angle to take to catch the ball. That's because they understand angles. Like Anna loves to chase squirrels. And when the squirrel takes off, she knows what angle to take to catch the squirrel because they understand angles. So all we're doing in converging is we are applying that nature of the dog that they understand angles, and by moving toward a jump, even if you don't get near it, the dog knows to take that jump. Now that may not be true of all dogs. It's true of my dogs. It's true of a lot of dogs. It's something you need to see if it works for you. Now with converging, there's one thing you have to think ahead about, and that's the simple fact that you can't be running along the line if you want to converge, because you haven't left yourself any room to move in. Now motion, number one cue, strongest cue, converging is a type of motion. It's a great thing to have, but if you're on the line, how do you move in? How can you converge? You can't. You got to get back 5, 8, 10 feet if you can. I think when I talked earlier about one of the entries into the send, I said, it'd be better if you don't go all the way to the line. You save yourself 5 feet. You send your dog, 20 feet to the first jump instead of only 15, so you can be back a little bit from the line, so then you have the opportunity to converge. So how do you do that? Well, there are a couple ways you do that. One is you just simply send them further, or you kind of turn away earlier, and maybe you've achieved that distance, so you don't have to go all the way to the line when you're sending them in. Sometimes you can actually move away from the line. I'll tell you that when I send the dog into a tunnel, like oftentimes the tunnel is the first obstacle in ascend. While the dog is in the tunnel and they can't see you, I'm moving back. While they can't see me, I'm moving back 5-8 feet. So as they're coming out of the tunnel, I'm converging, I'm in motion because I was able to move back to get it. So you have to find a way to get away from the line so you can converge. That's where you have to think ahead when you do fast. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the computer and the voiceover, and I'm going to give you a bunch of charts and examples of how converging works. And I think that'll be better rather than me just talk up here and point, because you'll have a better chart to look at. Okay, here's the first one. You might notice this is an example we used in the running shoulder turn, and that's because this is one of those situations where you do either. If you've got yourself up to the line and can't get back, you might as well just do a running shoulder turn. Turn your shoulders in to the 5, and maybe you do your jump cues, and that will get you there. Otherwise, if you have been able to keep back like 5 feet, you could step back from your 5 feet and move in converge toward the number 5 jump. Okay, let's try this one going the other direction. Okay, here's another one that you could do either way. You could run along the line if you're there, or if you want a stronger cue, you could back up 5-10 feet from the line to converge, move toward the 5 or toward the 6, whichever one you need. If you converge toward the 5, you may have a little problem converging to the 6, so hopefully you'll be able to create a little arc when they take that 5, come back around to the 6 with your forward motion and your shoulder turn. You probably won't be able to converge for both, so I would stay back and try not to converge to the 5, leaving that for the 6. Okay, remember what I told you before about when they're in the tunnel. When they're in the tunnel, you have an opportunity to move back so you can converge. So that's that one. Okay, this is where it's starting to get tricky, because if you go into the 4, if you do a running shoulder turn when you're running down the line, your dog might see you there and come toward you or to the 6 backwards. So you need to make a good strong cueing move to get them to the 5. Now, there's a chance that the dog has speed and obstacle focus and is going to go to the 5. But there's also a chance that your position, particularly like if you're right here, you will pull them toward you or maybe to the jump. So the strong cue would be moving back while they're in the tunnel and angle in big and hard as they're coming out. So they see that motion toward the 5, you're converging, so they'll be more likely to take the 5. It may work without it, but if you want the strongest cue possible to keep them to that back jump, the number 5 jump, you need to move back while they're in the tunnel and converge strongly in. Okay. Okay, this is when it starts to get hard. The difference between this and the previous one is that a jump along the line, which means at some point the dog and you will be on the opposite side of that jump. And the problem there is that whenever there's a jump between you and your dog, that's kind of an invitation for your dog to come toward you to take that jump. It's just a natural occurrence. That's your big problem in fast when there's like a layering jump like that. And this is a hard one to deal with, and the best solution I've always found is that converging. As they're coming out the tunnel, you be in an angle, so the first thing they see coming out is they see you moving in. That way they're not, and then you need to avoid getting behind that jump. You may want to run parallel to the line, but if you're anywhere near that jump, you're just asking the dog to come to you and not take that. So the only way to deal with this situation, I think, is to converge hard as they're coming out of the tunnel to push them that number 5. Okay. So now we have the rear tunnel entry into the send. You got to bypass the wrong tunnel entry, which is the closer one. We talked about this earlier. One thing you do is you keep your dog on your left side to kind of shield and block the dog from the closer wrong tunnel entry. And then I also suggested you push to an outside point, maybe 2 or 3 feet away from the number 4 tunnel entry, just to keep it further away from the wrong tunnel entry on the way in. And that way it's harder, but in some ways it's easier, because as your dog is coming out of the tunnel, it sees you earlier, and that means it can react to what you're doing earlier. When they're going out the back way, they may have to turn their head to see you all the way behind the line, as they cannot react as fast. So in this way it's an advantage. Now you still have the dog coming out of the tunnel pretty quick with that 6 maybe in view, and you want to make sure it sees you in motion as they're coming out of the tunnel. Now I'm going to tell you something very important. It's something I've been doing with tunnels for a long time, and I say that you need to be in motion as the dog is coming out of the tunnel. Have you ever seen any of those videos, or like high-end tournaments like FCI or something? You ever see anybody go up to like a straight tunnel and stick their hand in front of the tunnel while the dog is in the tunnel? One of my dog teaches that. The big tournaments like FCI, you can see people doing that. I mean, the very good people are doing that. And the reason for that, I believe, is that they want to tell the dog as soon as possible which way they're going to go when they come out of the tunnel. So in our instance, you don't want to be still waiting for the dog to come out of the tunnel and then decide to move, because then the dog has 2 things it has to process. First, it sees you and says, oh, look, there's mommy, I'm going there. And then it has to make a second decision. Oh, look, mommy's now going that way, I need to go that way. Well, that's 2 things the dog has to process. And that could be like 2 times a 10th of a second or 2 times a 1/3 of a second. It's just twice as long as it needs to be. And in this particular case, with the dog coming out of the tunnel hot or fast, you want only to make one decision. As it's coming out, it wants to see you in motion. So as soon as it sees you, it knows, oh, I'm going back over there. So be in motion as your dog is coming out of the tunnel. I'm not saying that just for fast. I'm saying that for tunnels in general. Sometimes I even back up to the side of the tunnel as the dog is coming out to make sure I'm in motion. It sees where I'm going as it's coming out of the tunnel, so it only has one decision to make as to where to go. Okay, so here we go. The dog goes into the back entry of the tunnel, and as it's coming out, it sees you in motion, converging back there, and that's how you get him back there. Okay. Okay, I just threw this one in just to show you something even harder than the last one. You got that layering jump in there. That jump might help you get him into the 4, but as you're coming out of the tunnel, that layering jump is going to present a real difficulty, because the dog is going to see that and very likely go right for it. And once again, you do the exact same thing. You converge, but if you had any doubt that you needed to be in motion to cue the dog as early as possible to go back to the 5, this is it. We had a sin just like this last year or so. I tried to tell people to be in motion, but they didn't quite understand it. Hopefully you do. All right. I put this one in just to make the point that although I stress natural reactions by dogs and not a lot of trained behaviors, sometimes when you're doing fast, you just need a trained behavior to get it done. I've had sins like this 3 or 4 times, and I can't get them because I don't have independent weaves. And I think every time that I've had a sin like this, it was a USDAA judge who crossing over into AKC, and those guys, their courses are harder. Not that it's not fair game, but I like challenging things, but this is impossible for me. If you don't have trained independent weaves, which I can tell you that I bet you 90-95% of AKC handlers don't. The super good people do, but for the most part, Very few people have good independent weaves. And there's a layer here. The problem here is that, as I talked about before, because of that layering jump, I could do the weaves at a distance of 10-15 feet as long as I'm moving along, but that layering jump, you just drew the dog back to me. Okay, so sometimes you have to have trained behaviors. Remember this one? This is one of our first charts from one of the first lessons in this series on FAST. It was a momentum lesson, but there is a converging lesson as well on here. So why don't you take a look at it, about what we've talked about, think about that, and I'll come fill in all the blanks in about 5 seconds. Okay, now the dog is in the tunnel, and it's a pretty good distance, like 25 or 30 feet from the 5 tunnel to the 6 jump. So as the dog is coming out and sees me on the outside of the send line, there's a good inclination the dog is going to come to me. In fact, as I recall, Anna did start to move toward me, but I knew that was likely to happen. So as the dog was in the tunnel, as always when the dog is in the tunnel, you have the opportunity to move out away from the line, because you're moving away from the line is not going to affect them. So I moved away from the line, maybe 5-8 feet or something like that, and as she's coming out of the tunnel, I start converging to the number 6 jump. And she did start to veer to me, but she saw my motion and she went and took the 6. So as we talked earlier today, you always have to find opportunities that you can get away from the line so you can converge, and this is another example of that. Okay, that is it for converging. I'm actually going to have a whole lesson on converging that will include a lot of this, but there are other applications in terms of working distance in general, and big circles, and even stuff at the start line, and that'll probably be ready by the end of 2020. And I hope you learned some stuff, and next time we'll be doing some special situations, so just don't forget to cue more.